Welcome to episode 4 of the Composer Happy Hour, presented by Whatever and Ever Amen. Thank you so much for tuning in. I want to give you a quick reminder that this podcast is also available in video format, and that's probably a more personal way to be a part of the conversation. So if you want to watch the episode, please visit us at www.buymeacoffee.com/whateverchoir. That's www.buymeacoffee.com/whateverchoir. In addition to all the podcast episodes, you can catch some of our other media there. And if you feel so inclined, you can buy us a beer and help support future projects by Whatever and Ever Amen. I am really excited for today's conversation. Dale Trumobore is an outstanding composer, and in fact, she wrote one of my most favorite lines of choral music ever. She's also a prolific writer, and her book, Staying Composed, is a great read for those interested in composition, yes, but to anyone who's considering a new project and maybe dealing with feelings of anxiety or struggling to see the bigger picture. If you don't already have a drink, hit pause now and pour one for yourself, or check out our social media to get the recipe for the drink that Dale is going to share on today's episode. Either way, fill your glass, sit back, and relax. You've earned it. And join us for the conversation. My name is Brad Pearson. My guest today is Dale Trumobore, and this is the Composer Happy Hour. Dale Trumobore, welcome to the Composer Happy Hour. So happy to have you with us tonight.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. Being that it is happy hour, we should get down to the important stuff right away. What are you drinking tonight?
Okay, so I'm going to attempt to make my drink on camera,
Yes.
which is ambitious. Right now, there's some ice.
Yeah.
So this drink is just going to be some fresh fruit juice from my backyard because I have lemons and oranges and loquats, which don't juice very well. I just attempted this. Do you know what loquats are?
I could venture a guess maybe, but no is the answer.
They look like this.
Yeah.
They're really weird, and I had never tried one before I moved into a house that had loquats.
Yeah.
So we have loquat and orange and lemon juice, which I will pour into my cup. I'm also in my office, which is strange to be making a cocktail in my office. Not usually a thing. And then I'm just going to put tequila in here because I have some leftover tequila from a road trip with my in-laws to national parks that I took earlier this month. And I was going to measure it, but I never measure anything because I'm allergic to recipes. So I'm just going to pour some in there.
Yeah.
That looked healthy.
Sure.
And then we're good.
Nice.
And I have a
so kind of margarita vibes is what we're going with it.
Margarita, but low key, literally whatever fruit is on hand plus tequila.
Yeah. Well, this is super California of you, which I'm going to ask you about in a second. I'm going to introduce my drink and then I have questions. So okay. I'm drinking beer, which is generally my go-to. This is actually a California beer. This is the Woot Stout from Stone Brewing, which is in Escondido. It is from 2018. It's kind of boozy, like 11.5%, but it's bourbon barrel aged and has some pecan in it, and so nice, tasty, boozy stout.
Awesome. I've been there. I've been to the brewery.
It's gorgeous, isn't it?
Yes.
I was lucky, actually, when I was in Germany a few years ago. They were just getting ready to open their Berlin tap house, and so I got to go visit. Things were still being built. The kitchen wasn't in, but got to go and see the grounds in Berlin. So I've been to 2 different Stone locations, which was pretty cool. Well, cheers.
Cool. Cheers.
So you live in California. True or false? Everything is better in California.
I'm from the East Coast, and I came out here for grad school and stayed here. So that would seem to imply that true things are better here.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you moved into a new house. This was recent, right? Like last fall or late summer, something like that?
Yeah, it was mid-August. My husband and I moved.
Was this the first home ownership?
Yes.
It's exciting.
Yes.
That's great. Well, congratulations.
Thanks. The house is from like 1905, I
Yeah.
think. It actually has a plaque and a name. It's the Clark
Nice.
House.
How
It's
about that?
super old. Yeah.
The first house I bought here in Toledo was a 1907 home, but it had and so it's like in the historic district of town, but there had been a huge fire at some point, and basically everything inside the house was not from 1907. So
Right.
it looks kind of old from the outside and wasn't really. So I don't know if that's good or bad, but I didn't maybe deal with some of the pitfalls that come with old houses sometimes. So yeah, and then we didn't stay there for very long, and we're in a much newer house, which whatever, less charming, but a little bit easier maybe.
Yeah.
Well, great. So you mentioned you're from the East Coast. I've been starting all of these episodes with what I tell people are my like James Lipton style questions. When and where were you born?
I was born in New York City because that's where my parents lived. They actually moved to northern New Jersey where I grew up, but they still were going to a hospital in New York City for their doctor's visits and to have me and everything. And apparently I think I was born within like an hour of getting to the hospital.
Wow.
And my parents like to joke that they almost had me like mid-drive from northern New Jersey into Manhattan.
And but, was that because it just happened quickly, or because of traffic getting into the city, or?
I think it just happened very quickly. And but luckily they made it. And I don't know, my dad likes to tell this story of he ran into some other guy in the waiting room, and that guy his wife had been in labor for hours. My dad, arrives and he says hello, and then like an hour later, he's like, "It's a girl," and they're like, "Screw you," because the wife was still in labor. But
well, I kind of know that the story well. I mean, not your story, but the story of fast or not fast labor. We had our first baby about a year ago. He's going to turn 1 next week, and it was not over in an hour. So that's, I guess, a unique thing. But and I asked, and when were you born?
November 15th, 1987.
Wonderful. And what are your parents' names?
I feel like you're just trying to hack into my bank account now.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Cindy and Harry.
And what do Cindy and Harry, or what did they do when you were growing up?
So my mom is about to retire. She's retiring in like a month, which is very exciting. But she was a fiction editor. And so was my dad when they met. And then my dad was a stay-at-home dad for the first 10 years of my life. And then he became a reporter, so he'd been a cartoonist as well. He was like stay-at-home dad / cartoonist. He illustrated books for Car Talk and Miss Manners and Ariana Huffington, like one of her books, and just this random assortment of lots of books in the 90s, and then got a job at a local newspaper as the cartoonist, then became a reporter, then became the editor-in-chief, then retired.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
that's
my mom now,
interesting career trajectory, but yeah.
Yes, and my mom was an editor of fiction, then children's books, then worked in educational publishing, and then now writes children's books. Wow. Like picture books. So both of my parents had this crazy, like artistic, multiple passions, and like just lots of literary everything in my family. Yeah.
Are her picture books available on like Amazon or the local bookstore near me? Or near someone?
Yeah, no, probably. So she publishes, it's funny too, she publishes under her married name, even though she kept her last name. Mm-hmm. And I kept my last name when I got married. So I just think it's funny, most people use a nom de plume. Yeah. Or not most people, but when they pick one, it's something different than the name that everyone already assumes she has. But so
Sure.
Cindy Trumobore is the name she publishes under. And
Okay, I'll have to take a
Yeah.
look. Cool.
yeah, you should.
And were they are they musical? Was music a big part of your household growing up?
Yeah, so my mom loves musical theater and would play the piano all the time when I was a little kid. And eventually I got better than her at piano and was like a really mean teenager, in the sense that I would be like, I can play that better than you. Like, just let me play
Sure.
it. Which now I'm like, that was so rude and awful. Way to be terrible, like just as teenagers are. But
Yeah.
terrible to your mother. But yeah, so my mom sings in choir and plays piano, and my dad loves music and will like sing around the house and whistle and just like is musical, but doesn't play an instrument anymore or anything.
Yeah. And so was the soundtrack of your youth music that they liked? I mean, do you remember a lot of the music that they were listening to when you were growing up? Is it something that you enjoyed listening to at the time or that you enjoy listening to now?
Yeah, so I still love musical theater, and I grew up listening to like a lot of Cole Porter and Gershwin, and the singer Barbara Cook. My mom loved, and I love, or loved. She passed away fairly recently, and like my mom and I exchanged tearful text messages, and we're like, we're gonna listen to Barbara Cook all day. But yeah, I very much carried that love for. I think musical theater came before choral music and classical music, even for me, in terms of what I knew and what I loved.
And so you were playing piano at home, listening to a lot of music at home. What was the first not at home musical endeavor? I mean, was it a choir? Was it elementary school music? Was it, I mean, where did you kind of get into that?
Yeah, it was piano lessons and then singing in chorus in school, both of which I started doing when I was about 7. And yeah, then continued doing all the way through grad school. And I'm sad that I'm not in a choir
Sure.
now, but even with the pandemic, I've been thinking like maybe this is the time to get, like, when it ends, maybe
Yeah.
now's the time to get back into a choir because I miss it.
Sure. So when then, I mean, obviously then music is something you're passionate about early on. When did you have some sense that it was going to be something you pursued as a career?
So I was composing pretty much just alongside piano lessons my whole like young life, and I realized that when I was like 16, 17, I simultaneously took a music theory class that I really loved and was good at, and then I won a composition contest. I won a couple composition contests those sort of late teenage years, and so it was validation. I don't think you should have to seek outside validation for your art, right? But as a young composer, it was really nice to have this thing that I loved doing on my own as a hobby be recognized as something that I could potentially make money at, or that other people thought I was good at. And then to have the theory side of things, to have that really click, even without formal training, to just start taking a class in that and have it just like to be good at it was like, oh, maybe like I'm a composer and I'm not just someone who composes, I'm officially a composer, which yeah. Now, I mean, my philosophy is like, if you compose, you're a composer. But at the time, that external validation was helpful.
We had that conversation similar to this on the last episode, and I said, when did you kind of know that you were a composer? And she said, well, I don't label myself that way. Like, I compose, therefore I'm a composer. I said, right. I mean, I agree with that too, but there's, I mean, whether we think we should need it or not, we're all pretty gratified by some external validation, right? And that I think is helpful, especially when you're young, to have somebody say, oh, you're actually good at this thing you really love doing. So I can imagine that was a big thing. So, and then did you go to school for music? I mean, to college for music, and that was like right out of the gate, I'm doing this. This is the thing.
Yeah. So I've always been torn between English and music for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
So I double majored in English and music, but even in college, that English major sort of felt like the side thing to me. And when I was looking at schools, I was only looking at schools where I could do a double major, but at the same time, I wanted a solid music composition program. So I went to the University of Maryland and sang with Ed McClary there, and just had a really wonderful time and felt really supported too by the resources there,
Yeah.
which was like really, again, really important to have not just me in my, like in the basement composing lab with no windows, just toiling away, not to just be doing that, but to have really supportive professors and other students to collaborate with. Like I just had a really great undergrad experience.
Yeah. Well, so I want to talk some about your music, but I think probably people that are listening to this episode are listening because they maybe know who you are and know a little bit about your music. This is the Composer Happy Hour, but I could have just as easily probably hosted you on the Author Happy Hour because you write quite a bit. You have a book, which
Mm-hmm.
I own. It's on my bookshelf back there and is wonderful. Can you tell us a little bit, just, you don't have to go super in depth, but a little bit about what motivated you to write the book and kind of how you found yourself deciding that as a composer who was spending your time doing that and working hard at that part of your career, what made you decide to kind of also do this book?
Yeah, so I keep talking about this idea of external support, right? But another thing for me as a young composer, and even like especially in undergrad, was when I decided I wanted to be a professional composer, there was no roadmap. There were a few people I could look to, especially in the choral field, to see like what were they doing, how were they making a living. But I had so many questions about the creative process, about how to structure my days, um, about how to financial questions, how to like charge more for my, or how to start charging at all for commissions. Just so many questions about everything, and there were a few resources for composers, like New Music Box is great, was great, and continues to be great. But I wrote Staying Composed, and I'm working on, there are other books in the works. I just started outline, I have like a 72-page outline for a book on writing for chorus. So
Yeah.
that's probably going to happen like in a year or two. But I wanted to write these books to answer all the questions that I had as a young composer. Obviously, I can't go back and just hand myself a book,
Sure.
like hand young me a book via a time machine. But if I could, I'm trying to answer like all of the questions
Yeah.
that I had, and it's going to take a few books at least to do that, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But you're not just writing things related to music or composing. You just like wrote a short story. I just saw something on, I think on Instagram, about a short story that you'd written. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so that's been the last, I think it's maybe it's a year and a half now. I've been writing fiction, and I actually have a book-length collection of short stories now too that I'm trying to finish up and polish
Yeah.
and maybe send to agents, which is another like 2-year process where there's nothing but rejection.
Sure.
So that'll be fun. But yeah, it's again, like I've just always wanted to write and compose. And I think it's hard, especially when you're sort of entrenched in one thing, to then switch gears and do another thing. So fiction and even poetry, which I double majored in. Like my English major from undergrad is in creative writing. It's like I took a bunch of poetry workshops. I know how to workshop material. I know how to do that. But yeah, it's just, it's something I've always wanted to do. And now that I'm doing it, I feel like a more complete person. Like yeah.
You must love to work, because you sound very,
I do.
you sound very busy. I mean, I imagine people listening or watching wonder where you find time to do this. I mean, I think there are surely other creative people that are sitting there going, well, I've always thought about writing, but that's kind of what it is, right? It's like, I've thought about doing this, or, oh, I'd really love to do this. I, for example, recently had an arrangement of mine. I'm not like composer. That's not my strong area. But
we're gonna come back to this later.
No. Okay.
Yeah.
I dabble a little bit in some arranging, and have always thought I would love to do some composing. So my first arrangement had like a premiere. A friend of mine did it with her high school choir. It was lovely. It's published by a small publishing house in the UK. And it was like, this is really great. And I thought, oh, I've got something out there. I should do more of this. That has not happened, because time is so hard to come by. And I don't love work sometimes. I mean, I do, but I don't love work sometimes. And so it's easy for me to do something that isn't work. You sound like you love to work, and you must be very good at kind of deciding that that's prioritizing that for yourself. I don't know if that was a question. Tell me why you love work so much.
So I don't love like every single part of what I do, right? There are days where I have emails upon emails to send, and I will do anything possible to avoid sitting down and sending those emails, or just, I don't know. Or like, I have moments where I get really frustrated with composing and writing. I've written about that too in Staying Composed and in essays, where like, in a way it's good that I have those challenges, because then they give me more to write about, I guess. But I will say that I've, like, from the very beginning back in college, I knew I wanted to structure my creative life and my professional life so that I made a living doing what I love to do. And I got there before the pandemic, and then the pandemic hit and like now things are a mess. But I finally reached that goal of making enough money to support myself completely. And I dropped all my piano students in January 2020 and was making a full-time living composing, and still am, but it's sort of a dry season.
It's this has just been just the most bizarre year, but even longer than that. I mean, things got real weird like 5 years ago. I don't know, something like that. But it's just been so strange, and it's hard to talk about things without getting into that and addressing it. And yet I think all people want to do is not talk about it and just kind of like get back to normal. I feel like everybody's so anxious for things to feel normal, and I don't know if that's ever really going to happen, but more normal for sure.
I read something that it's probably on Twitter. I read a tweet that said it makes sense that there's like very little art about like the 1918 plague, and like there's a reason that we skipped to the Roaring Twenties, and there's like all this art and like history from the 1920s, and then we just don't, like, I know all I want to do is just brush the last year under the rug and just move on with my life. But at the same time, like, talking about the short stories, and like I made a bunch. I didn't make as much art as I would have had there not been a plague happening. Sure. But it's easy to say, like, I wish the last year never happened. And then I know, like, personally, we bought a house, and right, and like I finished a lot of projects, and there's some really good things there, but at the same time, it's just been horrendous for choral music in particular and music in general, and I think we have to at least acknowledge that too.
Yeah, for sure. With all of the writing that you do and your background in poetry, have you set your own poetry to choral music? Have you done any of that, much of that? Do you plan to do more of that? And what is that like? I mean, do you battle like the poetry versus the composer side of you, and kind of which part of that art you serve first? Because I think some music does really well to kind of serve the poetry, and some music is maybe the music's at the forefront and the poetry is sort of secondary. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I definitely have set my own poetry and text to music, and that's something I hope to do more of in the future as well. But that too was sort of a learning curve, and the getting over. I think whenever we do something for the first time, we have to accept that we might fail doing it, and so to do that publicly. For the first time or even the second time and the third time, I still was like, maybe this is awful. Like maybe I'm really bad at this. And just people are gonna look at this piece and be like, oh my God, why did she think she could possibly write text? But there's so much bad poetry out there. Like I say this in Staying Composed. I find it helpful. And bad choral music. Like there's just bad art out there.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what your definition of bad art is, I think we can all agree it's out there. And so even just thinking like, oh, I can do better than that, at the bare minimum, I can write a poem that's better than that. Like that maybe isn't the best way of thinking about it for everyone, but that helps me be like, at least this isn't going to be the worst composer attempt at writing their own poetry that ever existed.
Yeah.
Like for some reason, that's weirdly reassuring to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you feel extra pressure when you're putting a piece together that has words and music by? I mean, is that a lot more weight on you to be successful?
I think there's a little more weight. Yeah, and I'm trying. I think I'm increasingly putting pressure on the text to be good, or to fit my definition of good, right?
Yeah.
My own standard of a text that I would normally choose, even if it wasn't written by me. Which is like, obviously it's hard to separate those things, but in the process of like when I am writing the music and the words, I always write the words first. I might change them in the process of setting them to music, but I try to write the poem so it's a poem and it works on the page. And then I go through my normal like revision process with that. And then I set it to music like I would any other poem, except I have the freedom to mess around with it.
Change things.
Great. Like that part's awesome.
Yeah. I want to talk about a specific piece of yours, because I may have mentioned this to you like in passing as a like fanboy over Facebook or something like that. You composed, these are not your words, but it is your music, one of my absolute all-time favorite lines of choral music. I don't know why it hit me that way and why I love it so much, but it is from In the Middle, and it is talking about the yeasty smell of baking bread. And that line, for some reason, the very first time that we were kind of reading through this piece and it was sung, I was like, that's great. And it stuck with me, that whole rehearsal. And still, sometimes there are moments in choral music that you kind of get attached to in the moment, right? And then you kind of put that music aside and you go on and you get excited about new things, and then that other thing doesn't seem quite as exciting anymore. that line, for some reason, it just plays in my brain all the time. It's like, it's always there. And somebody will just say something about like bread or yeast, or I'll just hear something that I'm like, and then I hear it. I love that line so much. That's not a question.
You bake a lot, don't you? Bake a lot?
Well,
that's probably why
I
that
have
line
recently
keeps occurring to you.
This predates. No. I've recently started baking a little bit. I have 13 times baked sourdough bread. And I know it's 13 times because I'm obnoxious and I post pictures of food all over Instagram. But yes, I've started baking bread, but this predates that by a lot. And I don't know why, but there's something about that line, and it is just so lovely. But I love that whole piece of music, and I love the words. Can you, I could talk about how much I love it over and over again, but can you tell people a little bit maybe about where that piece came from and what those, what the text is about, and what that kind of meant for you?
Yeah, so I can do that, but I also want to say that line, so the word yeasty, when I read that poem, and I read that poem and I was at the beach with my family, and the poem mentions the beach, and I had just been like reading outside in the hammock, and the poem has a hammock in it, and I was like the poem just hit me like a wave, like it just, yeah. I was like, I have to set this. But when I was setting it, I was like, how do I set the word yeasty? Like, this is right. But this happens so often, is that the word or line that I have the most trouble initially like conceiving of how it will be set ends up being one of my favorite or other people's favorite lines. And I don't know why that is. And usually my response is like, just do it really simply and let it be what it is without trying to make it too like musically complicated or anything. But you're not the first person to point out that line as your favorite, and the other half is steam from a pot of soup rises, right? And so, and people keep mentioning that whole sentence for some reason. I think it's so like grounded in home and like nurturing or something. And so I've had singers be like, oh, I had a cold last week and I just couldn't stop singing the line about the soup and the bread.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, so I read Barbara Crooker's poem in the middle and like knew I had to set it, emailed Barbara right away. And I'd worked with her before. And so I'm lucky that now I just send an email and get an email back that so far always says, yes, you can set it. And then I give her a contract and some money, and then we have another piece together. But I love how in that poem in particular, and in Barbara's work in general, there's just such a sense of like waking up to your life and appreciating what you have in a very specific grounded moment. And that's like the beauty of art, is that specificity and that awakeness and that aliveness. And I think Barbara does it so well. And my hope is that my music does it too. But it helps in choral music, of course, to choose texts that are already evoking the emotional responses that you want to evoke in the music itself.
Yeah.
But I love that. I love that poem like so much. I just adore that text.
Yeah. Well, I do too. I mean, the whole poem is great. And I think for me, part of why the piece really work and really connect is because it feels natural. It feels like language of the vernacular. Like, I'm not a poet, but I feel like those are words I could write. And I don't think that always happens in choral music, and there are a litany of reasons why, not the least of which is like copyright and finding a poet that you can actually work with. And, but we have so many settings of kind of older what are now like classic poems for choral music, or poets that are perfectly lovely, but they don't sound the way I sound, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not speaking with my voice when I sing their
Mhm.
words, and I think that in the middle feels like it is. I'm speaking as I'm singing, and so it's a really easy way um, to connect. So do you find that draws you to writing music with lyrics by living poets for that? I mean, is there something about that excites you?
Yes. So 100% yes. That's why I work mostly with living poets, is because I'm looking for that immediacy and that sense of connection to our everyday lives. And when we're talking about that, again, that specificity and that awakeness, I think that's easier to achieve if it's in words that we don't sort of have to translate first into our modern life. That's not to disparage older poetry, and
Sure.
I've set a bunch of it too. But even in those poems, like the whole sea in motion is an Anne Bronte text, but that's still about, it's her experience of seeing the ocean for the first time, and so it's still, to me, there's still like a real vibrancy to those words. Or love is a sickness, that's a text that's centuries old, but it's talking about how love is really fickle. And even though the words are not contemporary, like just the phrase love is a sickness, like that sounds very modern. That still felt fresh to me when I was setting it however many years ago. So yeah, I'm looking for me, there has to be an immediate connection to the text. And I think there's something in like when I choose a text too, I don't want to have to like untangle the sentences too much, because music is a time-based language and it necessarily usually stretches the words anyway. So if we have a long, tangled, complicated sentence where the syntax is very like sort of dense and complicated, by the time you get to the end of the sentence, your listeners might have forgotten what happened at the start of the sentence, just if they're trying to make sense of it in real time. Um,
Yeah.
and for some reason, every time I've said this a lot, like in talking about text setting and things, and every time I try to explain this, I end up saying a really, really long, complicated run-on sentence. I don't know. I have to
Sure.
work on that.
Makes perfect
But
sense.
yeah, like that sentence I just said would be terrible to set to music, because you'd be like, what the hell is she talking about? Where's
Sure.
her point? Like, when's she going to reach her point? And I don't want my listeners to feel that
Yeah.
at all. I want them to just connect, you know?
Yeah. I think it's interesting. I've thought a lot about this for uh, a lot of years, but as we talk in kind of the arts, whatever that means, and like classical music, which I kind of hate the labels of like, this is classical music or art music, and this
Mm-hmm.
is pop music. And but when we're thinking about classical music, there's always this kind of underlying discussion about how do we engage our audience, how do we bring in new audiences, and right, especially like symphony orchestras are concerned about the kind of aging uh, population of their audiences, and how do we bring in young listeners. um, and I think choral music maybe has an easier avenue in some ways because of text. um, when one of the great things about hearing a pop song on the radio is that even after your first listen, you can sing parts of it back, right? I mean, there's
Mm-hmm.
something that connects really easily. And sure, that's maybe because the melodies are not always super complicated, but a lot of that's the text, right? You can understand the words and there's something to grab onto. Um, and I think that's a real opportunity for choral music if we're setting texts that an audience immediately understands and doesn't have to translate or think too hard about what it means. That doesn't mean it doesn't have to have depth or substance, right? I mean, it can still have all of that, but that it maybe provides an easier access point for listeners, and something that they'll identify with quickly, but also be able to take with them more readily. I don't know.
Yeah, I think a lot about like you were talking about pop music, I think about repetition and how to use, even if it's like on a micro level in a choral piece, like on a motivic level, or in a bigger sense where there is a refrain, how composers can steal that from pop music, classical composers can steal that from pop music and use repetition. I do think audience members, I know like I respond well to that. I respond, we tend to like things that we hear often, like even bad pop songs, if we hear them enough times that we find them stuck in our heads. So I think about that, and I think about clarity of the text, where I really at least once hopefully want the audience to be able to hear what the singers are singing without looking at text. And I know that's really hard, and sometimes that's on the choir, the conductor, and that's not just on me, but it's also like, that's on me. It should be in the score, hopefully, at least one time when the text is stated, the audience should be able to hear the words. And then maybe they get obscured, right? Maybe you do it once, or the opposite way, but like, yeah.
Yeah. You don't see many choruses or refrains or like direct repetition in choral music. Do you have thoughts on why that is? I mean, it seems to be something that we generally shy away from, that we're more about things that are kind of through composed, right? And it's something new happening all the time. I don't know if you have any idea why people feel that way, or why that is the thing.
I think a lot of it has to do with the poetry, right? With the text. And it might be easier if you're setting something that's, if you're writing a piece that's strophic, that has repeating, where the text is already set in a repeating rhythmic pattern, in a rhyming pattern. It might make more sense to have the music repeat, but even that's not a direct refrain. And so what I've done sometimes is, if there's a phrase that I really want to become a refrain, I will just repeat it again later on in the piece. But yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that too. I'm planning to write a piece that's a concert length piece that will have audience refrains where the audience gets to sing, which I've done on a smaller scale in a piece called Returning that has an audience refrain. But I think I'm like not religious, but I was raised Episcopalian, and there is something so communal about like having a refrain or having someone sing something to you and singing it back. It's like that reciprocity feels, I think, really, really good. Like there's like on a gut level, that feels like connection. And so there's not a point to that necessarily, but I've been thinking about that a lot.
I love that. You know, it also takes the pretense out of it. I think that one of the reasons we still have this kind of dichotomy of classical versus pop music is that sometimes the classical side of things is a little bit pretentious. You know, I mean, the idea that like we're going to get up on stage in our tuxedos and dresses, and we're going to dim the lights so you can only see us, and you can only clap where it's appropriate to clap, and we'll let you know where that is, right? That it's this level of pretense that exists. I understand it, and I understand the tradition, but I don't always think it's good. And I think that anything we can do to break that barrier and make the audience feel like they're part of a community, they're part of what we're doing, and that they're involved, right? Because they are. We can't have a concert without them. And so anything that makes them feel like they're part of what we're doing, and that they're the important people in the room, and that we're just kind of sharing with them, I think is great. So I love that you're doing that, and I'll be excited to hear it. When you write music, do you write by hand, or do you put it directly into notation software?
I've gone full circle on this from when I was like, 7 and then 12 and got my first notation software, like really primitive program. I started out writing by hand. I got really into like using Sibelius in late high school. And some pieces I'll say I still mostly write in Sibelius. Like if I'm writing for orchestra, I'll sketch at the piano and then I'll quickly move to Sibelius. But choral pieces and anything for solo instrument or just a few instruments, I will try and write by hand as much as possible. So I try and stick with that. Like it's really important to me to, it's a different process and it feels more organic in a, like, maybe that sounds pretentious, like, I don't know, but organic in the sense that it's like hands-on and like I'm grasping the music in my hands. I'm composing at the piano, this piano. And that's just like really important to me to do that as much as I can before it goes into the machine and like locks in and becomes something really concrete.
Yeah, there's something that, I mean, touch is a powerful sense, right? And I think things that are tactile feel more authentic in a way because we're interacting with it in a different way, right? I mean, I mentioned that I was baking bread. I mean, I do everything with it by hand. All of the mixing of the dough is all with my hands. And that feels like it is a much different process than if I put it into a stand mixer, right? With the dough hook on, which I could do. And it might be easier, but it doesn't feel as authentic to me, right? Mm-hmm. It's there's something else doing work for me. When you write short stories or books, do you write by hand or do you type directly into a computer?
So I type directly into the computer, but what I also do is I make weird little sketchy notes in the notes app on my phone and just in whatever notebook I have near me. And at some point, usually I'll outline things by hand on paper, like in a trying to get a big picture sense of how the piece or how the book is going to come together as a whole. Yeah. So yeah, everything starts with those, like music or words, it starts with these little sketchy ideas jotted down anywhere, but often in the notes app on my phone because it's there.
Yeah. This is a weird question that I had no idea I was going to ask. Do you think kids should still learn to write in cursive? Do you think that that's important for them to learn?
I don't know. I mean, I've heard that there's the debate of like, do we need cursive? I personally have horrendous handwriting that is like exactly halfway between cursive and print. Yeah. And it lets me write really fast and then no one but me can read it. Like even my husband has trouble deciphering things sometimes. So yeah, I almost feel like it's one of those things where maybe like it would be worth knowing that it's out there, getting a little bit of experience in it, and then not, I think when I was in school, there was pressure to like, you have to write this in cursive. And that was not, I didn't want that. Like that did not fly. I also hold my pencil like this, like with two fingers. And I had teachers who would insist, like I had a substitute teacher one day who insisted that I write like with one finger here instead of two. And I just think none of that matters. It's what you're writing down that matters. And you want to be able to do it quickly. And so if that's in cursive, great. If that's in, I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, I tend to think it's not very important. But I don't know. Something about what we were talking about writing versus typing made me think of that. I thought maybe as the daughter of writers and writer that you might have an opinion on that. So
I do think some, like there's some letters that I'm trying to think, like G's, and that I write in cursive and it's faster. And so that's better for me. But
I hated the way that I wrote in cursive and I hated my signature. And so for years when I was younger, my signature was always the same and it was really bad cursive. And I thought it's not a cool signature. Like some people have a signature that looks really cool the way they write it. Mine was not that, and it didn't look very neat either. So I've sort of dispensed with, I only actually write like 2.5 letters for my whole name. I kind of write the capital letters and then I just draw a line basically. And that has become my signature because I was so tired of having ugly looking cursive. I don't know.
That's
I guess
like I was going to say my last name is like the Trumobore is too many letters to write in cursive for a signature. So it's basically a T.
Yeah.
And now you could officially probably like steal my identity. Just apply for a credit card in my name.
Somebody could definitely
signature. You could do that already, I'm sure.
Somebody could copy my signature real easy. It would not take very long to study. Yeah. Tell me, I hope that we have a varied audience of listeners. I don't know who's listening to this, Dale, but I hope there are people listening. And I hope that we have some people who are teachers and maybe some high school teachers. Can you think of some pieces? Your website, by the way, is very well organized. And you've got, you talk about SATB kind of more accessible versus more advanced. And there are a bunch of ways on your website to search for music by you've got a cool like word cloud kind of where they can search by theme. And there's videos all over. So if people go to your website, they'll be able to find all your music. But for somebody listening who may not know your music or may have only heard something really challenging that was done at a convention by a really great group or something like that. Can you maybe think of a piece or two that would be maybe more accessible that somebody with not an ACDA ready group could program?
Yeah, so the accessible section of my website is hopefully that, although there's still, of course, a varied skill level there, but Threads of Joy is one piece that a lot of high schools have been doing. And I just made an arrangement for SSAA choir for that. And one of my pandemic projects has also been taking a whole bunch of my existing pieces and arranging them for like whatever voicing they aren't. So a lot of SATB pieces became SSAA and or TTBB, and some, I think at least one SSAA piece became an SATB piece as well. And I'm really interested in doing more of that in general, just releasing a piece in multiple voicings so that it's not, I know there's so much, or it seems to me there's so much SATB rep that has this sort of effect or like text or emotional complexity that I want. And there's not as much, again, this is just my impression, but I think like we could do better, like composers could do better for our treble and lower voice choirs. So I'm working on that. Yeah.
100% agree with that. And I think part of the problem is that when we, there may be a even subconscious line of thought that when we make things more accessible, that they are skewed to younger singers. And so the things that are the easiest are often also the least mature text-wise.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that that's not the case. I hope that we have choirs that need easy music who are very mature, because that means we're getting a lot more people singing, right? I mean, if the easy stuff is only for young people, we're not doing very good building our community choirs and church choirs and whatever else, right? So I hope that there is more of a push for not just SSA or TTBB voicing, but SAB voicing or unison music, or all of the stuff that would be maybe considered easier by some, but is still challenging and emotionally rewarding, because choir directors need that. Any other either like an SSA or a TTBB, did I say that right? Piece that a high school director might be able to just grab and pass out?
Yeah, so I have there's a new piece that I think is not, the score's not even up yet, but there are a bunch of new pieces and new arrangements going up hopefully next month, which would be June 2021. We're talking May 2021. If anyone's watching this not in May 2021. But the piece is Half the World, and there's a text by Frederick Douglass that's actually about advocating for women's voting rights. And it's a really cool text, and there's a link. I think there's a link in the score. It's definitely going to be on the website to go and see the full speech that he gave. But there, I turned the SATB version of that, which is the premiere version. I turned that into an SA in piano and a TB in piano version of that. So I think those will be hopefully a little more accessible. And then there's a couple more pieces hitting the website soon. The piece with the refrain that I mentioned, just real quick, returning, there's also SSAA and TTBB for that, but in the arrangements, it's in C. And I put it instead of, it was in A before, but I put it, I transposed it for the sake of the arrangement. And then I was like, oh, this looks so much easier on the page. Like, duh, because it's in C major now, but with some like mild chromaticism. But hopefully, again, those will be easier.
Yeah. What is it like when you're taking a piece that you have obviously spent a lot of time on and given a lot emotionally to, and created this piece of art that you're really proud of, hopefully, right? And excited about, and then you're now reworking it for other voices. I would imagine that has its own kind of set of challenges. Again, both technical and maybe emotional challenges that go with that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I've kind of gotten it down in terms of the technical side, I think, just because I've been doing so much of this lately with my own music. But I think I try to distance myself from it, almost like what I was saying about writing the poem first when I'm writing the poem and the music, right? I try to write the poem and do the best job I can, and then I try to sort of pretend that someone else wrote it and just like do my job and do my process. And so this is the same thing where I'm like, now I am an arranger. My job is just to create a really good arrangement and not to be like, oh, I could have done this part differently, or like, now is my chance to rewrite. Like, no, we're not fussing with the piano accompaniment. We're not like, we're just arranging. But sometimes it's really nice, especially like doing this. There's like 20 pieces or something that I've made new arrangements of, right? Like it's a lot. And to not have performances and not be like interacting with my own music the way I usually do, it's kind of nice to get back in touch with some of these pieces and have moments where I like appreciate what I did on the page and be like, oh yeah, like these 3 bars of Spiritus Mundi, like I really like them. And I remember like the process of composing comes back now that I'm working with them again. So yeah, it felt like a nice way to just kind of like remind myself that I'm a composer in the in-between moments. Yeah.
Have you ever changed it to a new voicing and actually liked the effect of the new voicing more than the original?
There have been moments, but I think because the original is first, that's just like the version in my head so far. But actually Threads of Joy, that one's like really fast paced. And I made the SSAA version and I was like, I really like it. Like this might even be better than the SATB version. So yeah.
I want to ask you some things that are completely unrelated to choral music or writing, because hopefully, again, people either maybe already know a little bit about you, or that's the stuff they're going to be able to find, right? Because obviously after people listen to this, they're going to do nothing but program your music and read your book and short stories. And I want to ask you some, totally completely unrelated, silly things. You're drinking a margarita tonight. What would be your normal, like posh California organic kind of margarita? No, so you're drinking a margarita-ish tonight. if you were out and going to a bar, what's your kind of go-to drink?
So it depends like where I am and what the context is
Yeah,
and how comfortable I am with who I'm with. I like beer a lot. Uh, and I'm not super picky about what kind of beer. Like
sure.
I don't know, like I like stouts as much as I like hazy IPAs. Like there's no discrimination in
Yeah,
the beer preferences. I'll drink almost anything if it's good. Uh, Sometimes I'll order a Negroni, sometimes I'll order a gin and tonic, and sometimes I'll order like a Jack and Diet Coke because I just
sure.
feel like, I don't know,
Yeah,
not being picky or having opinions,
yeah.
I guess.
I like to
Yeah.
say that I'm discerning but non-discriminating when it comes to beer.
I like that. Same.
Uh, red wine or white wine?
White wine, because red wine, I think, gives me headaches. And I know that, like, some people are like, that's not a thing. Like, it's not the sulfites, but I drink red wine and then I get a headache. So for me, it's a thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I get it. Um, what is your favorite type of cuisine?
Either Thai food or Indian food.
Okay, okay.
Yes. Both of which I can't quite cook. Like, I can't do it at home
Yeah,
the way that you get it in a restaurant. And I've tried, and I will never be as good as the chefs in
I
restaurants.
always
So
I I always feel like with those cuisines, and I guess mostly kind of Eastern or most Asian cuisines, I don't have many of those ingredients on hand.
mhm.
And so I'll get really excited. I'll see a recipe online and go, oh, that looks so good. I'm going to make that. And then I look at the ingredient list and I go, oh God, I got to buy all this stuff. And it only comes in this size package. And I'm never going to use all this. And then I end up not making it, which is always so disappointing.
Yeah.
But
We actually just started growing. I feel like curry leaves are one of those
mm,
ingredients where I'll read recipes and I really want to make them. And then like curry powder is not the same as a curry leaf at
right.
all. And so we just like I was at the gardening store because my husband and I have gotten into our like we have our new house and we're
Right.
trying to make our yard not look like the disaster it is. But there were curry leaves like a plant of curry leaves, and I got so excited, and it's thriving. Like we've killed the cilantro, we've killed the mint. The curry leaves are going. We haven't cooked with them yet, but like there's enough of it now that I just have to pick a recipe and go
Yeah.
for it.
So do you cook a lot at home? Is that something that gets you excited?
I don't know if sometimes it gets me excited. Sometimes it's more like it's there. I've gotten into baking
Okay.
in the pandemic. I've also made a lot of sourdough bread, although I will say I gave in and got a standing mixer because
Yeah.
I like my hand, it was messing with my hands, the
Yeah, sure.
kneading. I don't know, I was kneading wrong or something. But yeah. And then my husband and I are vegan, like semi recently. It's been like 2 years.
Sure.
So I've gotten really into vegan baking, which is like its own weird, delightful thing.
Yeah.
And which I would honestly recommend to anyone because I think half the time, like when you want to make something, you don't, or I used to run into this problem where like I wouldn't have eggs or I wouldn't have, like enough butter or something. But with
Sure.
vegan baking, I almost always have all the ingredients just in my cabinet, like ready to go, and I can make anything. Like I can just whip up a cake. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
I don't know.
All right. Have you been now? This question may not go the way that I hope because you seem to be such a diligent worker. But during the pandemic, have you been watching any TV? Have you been?
Oh yeah.
Do you binge TV shows?
Yeah, absolutely. So I also like I've had a lot of free time because I'm like I've been an out of work musician for much of this pandemic,
Yeah,
right? I've been
sure.
productive. I've been writing, but yeah, so I'm right now I'm rewatching Ted Lasso with my husband
So
because
good.
I loved it. And I'm like, he's really hard to get to watch TV. Like he just
Yeah.
he would rather play video games or like garden. Like he
Yeah.
just isn't into TV shows, but I'm like, you have to watch it because it's so good. And we finished Schitt's Creek, and I'm like looking now for the show that has that like heartwarming qualities
Right.
of Schitt's Creek and Ted Lasso that I need to find next.
I mean, I think those were the two like hits of the
Yeah.
pandemic, right? Those were the
Yes.
things.
Yeah.
And I mean, I watched Schitt's Creek very quickly, and then was so disappointed that it was over. You know, it helped me that my son was born in May of last year. And so not only was it a quarantine, but I was just on the couch all day, right? Because he didn't do very much. And so I got to watch a lot of television last summer, and Schitt's Creek was phenomenal. And Ted Lasso, my wife and I don't always agree on what type of shows we should watch. And I watch a lot more TV than she does. So it's hard to convince her, like, let's start this new thing. So I watched Ted Lasso without her. And then I had been begging her. I said, I'll watch it again. I'd love to watch it again. We have to watch it. I'll watch it again. And I finally got her. And, you know, of course, I don't know if you did this. I do this all the time when I try and convince her that something is really good. And then she like tries it or tries, you know, to do it or whatever. Like, I'm half watching the show, but I'm also like half watching her. Like, does she love this? Did she think that was funny? Is she right? And I think it was maybe by about like episode 3 that I wasn't convinced that she loved it. And so I was like then providing commentary on the show. Like, Nate's so good, isn't he? He's such a great kid. Don't you love Nate? But she loved it. And so that was a big, I can't wait for season 2. Like,
I know.
For anybody who hasn't seen Ted Lasso, you have to watch it. It is, I mean, it's just like, it is so, it has so much heart and somehow feels so genuine, even though no person like Ted Lasso exists. I can't believe anyone is that kind, but he feels so genuine and authentic. And so it just makes me so happy even thinking about it, which I feel silly saying about a Jason Sudeikis sitcom, but it makes me so happy.
Me too. And yes to all of what you just said about the like looking over. And we just watched the Trent Krim episode at like with the interview. And that was the one where I think today or yesterday, Luke, my husband, was like, oh, we could watch a Ted Lasso. I'll do this like it was his choice. I'll be like what do you want to do? We could watch Ted Lasso, or we could do our separate things. And like I'm like testing the waters, like what? And we watched we've been watching The Great Pottery Throwdown as well, which I started watching at the beginning of the pandemic, but now it's all on HBO. And so season 4 is great. It's so good. And it's like heartwarming, but it's art, and so it's like soothing, and there's just enough drama, just like the Great British Bake Off too, like just enough drama to keep you hooked, but also just heartwarming goodness.
Well, we're lucky in a way. I haven't seen that, but we're only in like season 4 of Bake Off, Great British Bake Off, because neither of us had seen it. And then our son was born. We were like, we need something to watch, and we watched like 3 seasons in days. And then my wife was like, I just need a break from Bake Off for a little while, and we'll watch other things. And we had never really gotten back to it. And then just recently, I don't remember if it's season 4 or 5, something like that, but we still have quite a bit ahead of us, which is exciting.
Well, when you need another British, it's the same show, just with pottery. Like the editors must be the same. Sometimes I think the person doing the film score is the same. I haven't checked. It's great.
Yeah. Melissa Dunphy and I were talking about how wholesome British reality TV is versus American reality TV, and how lovely that is. Music, are there any, again, for lack of a better term, pop artists that you're into? Any commercial music that you're excited about right now?
Yeah, so I always blank on this question, even though I do listen to music. And I just made a playlist. I have a newsletter that it's supposed to go out once a month. And I've just, again, during the pandemic, it's been like once every 3 to 6 months. But I think I'm going to share on the next one the playlist that I made that's called Always in the Mood, which is 5 hours of songs that I never skip ever.
Wow.
Which again, I would have to like bring it up to tell you some of these people, but the bands that I've been listening to a lot lately, just over the last few years, is Wolfpack. They're great. Like, also for just party music, like you can put on any Wolfpack album or like the Wolfpack Spotify radio, and it just like is perfect. Yeah. And my husband and I used to live, before we moved, we lived around the corner from one of the people in the band, and we'd see him like leaving Trader Joe's as we were walking in. And I was like,
yeah.
We never talked to him. Now we are full of regrets, of course, but
yeah. And I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about reading. Is there an author or any books that you're really excited about right now?
Yeah, so I am like always excited about Carmen Maria Machado, who wrote Her Body and Other Parties and In the Dream House, which is a memoir that's like told with a series of tropes. So like one chapter is a choose your own adventure. Like every chapter is different, and it's really hard to explain, but it's brilliant. And I just think she's so great. And I feel the same way about Kelly Link and her short stories. And I just started reading Effortless by Greg McKeown. I don't know how to say his last name, but he wrote Essentialism, and I really liked that book. And it's nonfiction. It's like Essentialism was like how to only focus on the things in your life that are important and say no to all the rest of everything. And then Effortless is about like doing everything with ease, or doing as much as you can in your life with ease.
Yeah.
Which is something I talk about in Staying Composed. And obviously, like, that's not a new concept, but the way that he's describing it so far is really, I've just been highlighting like half the book as I read. So
yeah.
Super
cool. Well, I've been really looking forward to talking with you, and if for no other reason than that line and in the middle, let me tell you, I love that. I just love it so much. And from like that moment that I heard that one line, I have been like just such a fan of yours. And I love Staying Composed. It was good for me. I mean, there was a lot that I got out of it, and I've been able to like recommend that to singers that I've worked with as just a kind of general, even if they are not going into music or composition, just as a general kind of thing for young people to read, but anybody to read. And so I've been looking forward to an opportunity to talk with you more. You know, I think conductors often feel like they know composers a little bit, right? Because we have this piece of work that you've created, and so we feel like we know something about you, but we haven't really had a chance to talk much before. And so I was really excited to have you here, and I'm sure that other people will feel the same way, and hopefully feel like they know you a little bit better now.
Thanks so much. I was really looking forward to this too, and looking forward to drinking in my office for the first time. I have not had very much of my drink, but I'm looking forward to finishing it.
Well, see, you're on West Coast time, so the night is young for you. You've got plenty of time.
5:43 p.m. here as we're wrapping up. But
it's a real happy hour for you.
Yes, we started at 4:30. I think we started talking. So it's early, but now I can finish my drink in the backyard.
There you go. So, I have just a little bit left, so we should say cheers.
How was it? Wait, I want to know how the beer was.
The beer? Oh, it's great. I knew it was good. So I have a cellar collection of beer, like a couple hundred bottles.
Oh, wow.
So if it comes out of there, I know it's probably going to be good, because that's why it's there. So the Stonewood Stout is a sort of old standby kind of, you know what you're going to get, and it's always good. So
the bourbon barrel aged, you can't go wrong.
That's
with
right.
That
it's a winner.
Part. Yeah,
it's a winner. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you again so much for your time. We'll say cheers, And hopefully, we'll have a drink in person sometime soon.
Yes.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
All right.
Cheers. Thank you so much for joining me for episode 4 of the Composer Happy Hour, presented by Whatever and Ever Amen. Thank you to my guest, Dale Trumobore, for spending some time with us. When you finish here, go spend some time on Dale's website where you can hear all of her music. While one of the songs plays, hop over to Amazon and order a copy of her book. Or better yet, call your local independent bookstore and have them get you a copy. I hope you've been enjoying the podcast. If so, you can let us know in a few ways. Subscribe to our podcast on whatever service you're using, and please consider giving us a 5-star rating if you're on Apple Podcasts. This is super helpful. If you really enjoy the show and you want to help support future episodes, you can buy us a beer by visiting our page at www.buymeacoffee.com/whateverchoir. That's right, you heard me, buy us a beer. Visit buymeacoffee.com/whateverchoir to help support the podcasts and future projects by Whatever and Ever Amen. Our guest next time is Eric Malmquist, and we look forward to sharing another drink with you then. Thanks again, everyone. Cheers.